please can you remind me if you'll be so kind, staring out into space, asking God to hear my case, trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last? The purple angel, purple angel, purple angel, you're next to me.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I am your host and founder, Lori La Bey, and we have been doing this show since 2011. I just can't believe it. And our goal here is to shift dementia care from crisis to comfort around the world. So please subscribe today and listen and share, and you're going to learn new techniques and tips and resources on how to live graciously alongside dementia. And that's for people who are actually diagnosed, for family and friends, business professionals, researchers. Everyone is welcome here. And we try to talk openly because we all interact and have effect on one another when we're trying to care. So, and I know this journey personally because my own mother lived with the disease for 30 years. So I get the guilt, the frustration, the anger, the exhaustion when caring for another person. But I also have been able to find this path of joy and purpose and passion in terms of being present and really caring on an authentic level. It almost becomes a religious experience if you let it be. So listen and learn today. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I always like to do a shout out to a couple of organizations. The World Dementia Council is doing a survey on dementia-friendly programs. So they'd like to hear from you. You can go to alzheimerspeaks.com. I've got it front and center. This survey closes out the end of the month. So you're going to want to get that completed sooner than later. And help them hear what's going on around the world. The Memory Cafe directory, I love. I help bring those over from the UK. We're up to about 800 of them now, and it's just fabulous how this grassroots technique for care and support has really spread around the U.S. and other countries as well. And you can find more information to see if there's one next to you, or maybe you want to start one up. You can go to memorycafedirectory.com for more information. And then Stall Catchers is a game where we can all play this game and actually analyze real live Alzheimer's data. So you can go to stallcatchers.com to find out more information on that. And if you happen to be a business that's looking for help to expand your own brand footprint in the area of dementia care, reach out to me because we can help you do that by leveraging all of our different content platforms. Before I introduce our guest today, I just want to thank Artist Senior Living. They've been so gracious at hosting me at a few of their different locations, and I'm looking forward to going out to Reading and Lexington, Massachusetts, November 13th through the 15th. And then I will also be out in Alabama to their East Alabama area on Aging Alabama Cares Conference, November 20th through the 23rd. So if you're in any of those locations, come see me. I always love to hear from people. Now, today's topic, we're going to be talking about mental illness and dementia, and it's one that we don't hear a lot about, but I hear a lot of people discussing this and wanting more information. So I am thrilled to death that today we have Dr. Tami West with us. She is the author of The Stress Club and Life Without the Monsters. And she has delivered hundreds of standing room only presentations to groups not only here in the U.S., but Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. And guess what? Her most requested topic is really the story of hope that surrounds her mother's battle with mental illness and dementia. So Tami, welcome today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm so wonderful, and I'm so excited to be here, so thank you for having me.
Well, like I said, I'm very excited to have this conversation to set things up. I mentioned that your mom had both mental illness and dementia. Can you give us a little
Yeah.
background on her dementia, like around what age did that start, and what were some of the symptoms that you saw?
It's funny you asked because had I not just picked up her medical records a few weeks ago, I thought, you know what, I want to really look and see what they wrote about her, what the notes were, what they said. I'm not sure I would have been able to answer that question because for me, the mental illness and the dementia were so connected. You know what I mean? They almost like just morphed together. But
Mm-hmm.
as I got the medical records and I was reading them, I think when they really started to think about this as a diagnosis, it was about in 2010. And some of the behaviors that were worsening for her is her noncompliance with self-care and medications and that kind of thing, becoming belligerent when asked to do certain behaviors. So that was sort of like the beginning behaviors that said to them, you know what? In fact, in those notes that I read, it said that they were going to have us do a psych evaluation and then also a dementia evaluation. And that's when we first went to the neurologist and started having her testing. So, yeah, it was in 2010.
Okay. And okay, and just for our audience knowledge, your mom has since passed on, and so again, our sympathy goes out. It's always hard to lose a loved one, but I really appreciate you kind of standing up and talking about this story because I think storytelling is the way we cut to the chase, and we really help other people understand what might be going on in their own world and different techniques to be able to help them. So how did your early life relationship, with your mom affect you in how you dealt with her? Did she have mental illness throughout her life?
Mm-hmm. She did, and my sister and I laugh a lot because she has all these memories of the good and the bad things that went on when we were kids, but I really don't. I mean, I remember quite a bit of the bad, but I remember, so my mom and my dad's marriage was pretty tumultuous, but I remember the phrase nervous breakdown. You remember when we used to call it nervous breakdown? Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That was the phrase we used for people. So I remember there used to be this talk of my mom having these nervous breakdowns, plural. And I remember like in my mind, I do remember there was a lot of crying when I was a child. I remember there was a lot of like sadness and despair. So I remember that as a child. I remember that so my dad was a musician and he was on the road all the time. And this is going to seem like it doesn't relate, but it kind of does. So it was my sister and me and just my mom. And my mom always had this dream of just being a wife. And I don't mean just as in, oh, that's nothing. I just mean her dream was that, being a wife, being a mother. She wanted like 8 or 10 children. And then after she had my sister, and we were about a year apart, she couldn't have any more children. So it was just the two of us, and my mother and my dad was gone all the time. So we would my sister remembers more about this than I do. We would just play. Like we wouldn't have real life when we were little. We would just play. And then when it was time for my dad to come home, we would rush around and clean up this horrific mess of a house. And so he left when I was 10 and my sister was 11. And so all of that despair, but also play, and sadness, but also play, when he left, she became what I call like a non-person. So she stopped caring for herself, our home. She stopped caring for us. We had the health department called on us once because our yard and our house were so bad, the neighbors didn't know what to do. She could not hardly function, except she did have to get a job. She had to care for us. I mean, pay the rent. But sometimes a couple times I remember our house got so bad that we just moved. So looking back on that, I think that was sort of a hoarding, like an OCD type of behavior. But for most of her life, it was just depression. And I say just because that's what they said. She's depressed. She was on Prozac. But it just kept getting worse and worse. That might have been more than you needed to know, but when my dad left, her world just completely fell apart and the mental illness took over. And that became who she was. So that's who we
Wow.
lived with.
Wow, that had to impact your mental health and what you thought was normal or not, I would imagine.
Well, it did, and you and I chatted a little bit before because I didn't know if I had mentioned it to you. But of course, this is about Mom and not me. But all those things we grew up with, and the fear, because she also was just her depression was so deep that in her mind it was the world against us. So we weren't safe. No one loved us. We all slept together in the same bed. Well, even through when I was a teenager, because she could not bear for us to be apart from her. So this all for me went into severe panic attacks, severe fear, and then my mental hospitalization in 1995. So it was just all so connected. So as things continued to progress, there was a lot of anger in me and resentment for, and I do air quotes because of course I've let go of all that now, but what she did to us, and what she put us through. So it was hard as she continued to progress, and it did affect us. My sister suffered as well.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, and I hear a lot of times families going through kind of a similar story saying, I can't take care of this person. I don't care. I've had to draw the line in the sand here. This isn't healthy for me. What do you say to those people? How did you end up dealing with it and drawing boundary lines and things? I would imagine you had a few of them in there.
Yeah, I mean, as far as prior to this 2010-ish era when she began to deal with the dementia, as we grew older, I moved out right after I graduated high school, and still suffered the way that I did with the anxiety and the panic attacks and things. But my sister didn't, what I call, escape. And so what happened over the years is she and my sister basically lived together nearly her whole life. And that got so ugly. So I was able to set some boundaries with what I would and would not allow my mom to do. Sometimes she would call me 25 times a day. And the messages would be, well, okay, I'm just going to sit over here and die since you don't love me. Well, okay, then the next time you see me, I might be dead. Well, these were the kinds of messages I got. But my sister actually lived with her. And it got so bad at one point. And I told you I was going to be completely transparent, but she would pee on her floor. She would throw things at her head. There was a point when she did live by herself, and she had a heart attack because, all this anger and bitterness towards my dad, along with the mental illness, just escalated. And so she had a heart attack. And while she's in the hospital, my sister called and said, we need to go over to her house because she didn't pay her gas bill. The gas has been cut off. If they come back in to light the pilot light, they will call the health department. So we go over to her house, and I guess I hadn't been there in a while because what we found was absolutely unbelievable. We walked in, and, I talked about the hoarding, the filth, the things that were there, but I saw this blanket, and it was maybe a 2-foot mound of something, and when I went and took it off, it was trash beside her bed that she had or beside her chair, that she had just covered up with a blanket. My sister's cat was living with my mom. The cat was dead. There were 10-ish disposable litter boxes that she would just open a new one. There were bugs and maggots. I'm sorry if people are hanging up now and saying I'm not going to listen, but it was just so bad. So this is what my sister dealt with for years. And this is why, it was so hard. I think you asked me at one point, how did her history affect dealing with the dementia? Because we were dealing with such behaviors that when she started, when the dementia started to set in, it was difficult to look at any of those behaviors as anything as being evil and manipulative because we'd been dealing with them for so long.
Sure.
Because she'd battled with it all her life.
And that makes
make sense?
perfect. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Everyone's normal is what they grew up with, and it might not be our normal, but it was definitely your normal. and your home base. And I think that that's one of the important things that people really need to understand. I think when it comes to dementia, everyone wants this, and mental health too. They want this guidebook of A to B to C to D, and this is how things are going to progress, and this is what you can expect. And neither of them do that. They're very spontaneous, and everyone, reacts differently if it's mental illness and or if it's dementia, or if they're lucky enough to have both. Then you've really got a complicated thing on your hands there. And so I think that's, again, one of the things I think it's so important to be able to talk about these things. How when your mom got diagnosed, how did your sister deal with all of that living with her? Did things change, or did they kind of carry on the way they always did? And then I want to get to, how you dealt with it.
Yeah, my sister really did have a tough time because the height of the really bad stuff was when I told you she started walking around her house without pants on, throwing things, all that kind of stuff. And it was at that point that, and this was still not, we weren't even thinking of dementia, but what we did at that point, my sister said, I can't do this anymore. And I was trapped. She did live with me for a short period of time. That's a whole different story. But I speak and travel for a living, so I couldn't have her live with me. And so my sister just said, we need to get another psych evaluation. So what we decided to do was have her, and the doctor agreed, we had her admitted to a geriatric psychiatric unit. And we said, look, my sister was like, this cannot be just depression. This is not the way people act with simple depression. They don't do these things. She was being vindictive with my sister's children, and it was just getting worse and worse. And Lori, do you know what they said about my mom before they discharged her?
Oh, I can't even imagine. But
and I'm going to say a cuss word, okay, but it's not because I'm cussing. It's just what the psychiatrist said to us, just distraught daughters, especially my sister. I'm sorry, but it is depression, and your mother also sort of has can't get her shit together syndrome. That's what he said.
So respectful.
That was no help. That did nothing to help us. So my sister was like, okay, so we need to move her out. So we found an apartment a couple miles down the road and moved her into that apartment. And from there, as you can imagine, things got worse because then there was, at least with my sister, there was a little bit of being able to manage her medications. She was able to keep the rest of her house in order, except for the bedroom where my mom was living, which is another story here in a minute. But it was time to move her out, and then it got worse. So we moved her into the apartment. And my sister, from there, I mean, it's still, she is still kind of recovering from this whole thing with Mom, but she's doing better. She's definitely doing better.
I would almost think that there's some post-traumatic stress syndrome. I mean, because of, it was just always. It wasn't just part of the time. I mean, it was just a constant thing, and then to have to readjust to kind of a new normal, whatever that is. And I'm not a medical person at all, but I can't even imagine the trauma. Or maybe I can imagine the trauma, and that's why I say that. But I would think that would be extremely difficult and understandable, for her to still be processing through things. How we grow up, it really is something, I think, that no matter if it's good, bad, or ugly, it's something that people process all of their life. It kind of comes up like, just like with grief. When someone passes, you might think, okay, I got past that wave, but then typically there's another one and the waves change, but you still have those moments. Is it similar to that, would you say?
I think so, yeah. And I think that my sister thought that when my mom moved out, that everything would change for her and she would suddenly be fine. And but it's still much more complicated than that, because the damage had been done. And just because Mom wasn't in her home did not mean that all those things she'd been through suddenly were just roses and rainbows. It just didn't work out that way. So yeah, she's getting there, and it's just going to take some time. You're right. It is waves.
Yeah. Well, and I think with all of us, when we think we've hit rock bottom, like for your sister saying, I can't do this anymore, Mom's got to move. Mm-hmm. We all think that we're going to bounce up to the top. I mean, that's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
If we do this, it's going to, it's almost like we think it's a silver bullet, and there is no silver bullet for pretty much any of our situations. And it's a process, it's a journey. That we have to move along with. Now, for you, how did you deal with boundaries with your mom? You moved out, and you were traveling, and things. But I would imagine that even like with the phone calls and things like that, I hear from others that they call constantly, and pretty soon they they stop answering the phone, and will only answer at certain times of the day. For some people, others continue to answer constantly. How did you deal with it all?
Yeah, I think I looked at it differently, because when I think of, and I need everybody to know too that I am not an expert in Alzheimer's or dementia, or how to manage anything. I'm not an expert in that. So everything I'm sharing is just from my perspective and my experiences. But when I think of boundaries, I think we all tend to think of boundaries as ways to establish relationships, but it's also about sort of teaching the other person what you will and won't allow, right? So it's sort of to shape and let others know how to treat you. And so before the dementia, I set boundaries with my mother, but I guess the benefit of being in the mental hospital was that I learned how to do some of these things. So, for example, my mom wanted me to do something one time with my sister that I didn't agree with, and she threw the guilt. She was cussing, and I was able to say, Mom, I'll talk to you later when we can have, a regular conversation. So at that point, setting boundaries was about me and about her, showing her what I would and wouldn't let her do. I had made decisions along through the years with the mental health and just her overall as to what I would allow her to do, when I would go to her house, how long I would stay, and all that stuff. So it was a lot about her and also me. So when the dementia came about, I think when the dementia came about and things started changing, and I had to look at it differently, because before the manipulative phone calls, the aggressive behavior, the guilt-ridden messages, all those things. Before it was, she's doing this to hurt me, she's doing this to annoy me, I'm not going to allow her to do this, I'm not going to allow this to happen. But now it's different, because she wasn't really doing, now some of those behaviors changed, but a lot of them I really believe she wasn't doing on purpose. So now the boundaries were all about me. It wasn't about teaching her anything, because she wasn't going to take a lesson from anything I was doing. She wasn't going to stop calling me just because I didn't answer, because she didn't even realize she was doing it. She just did it. Mm-hmm. So I looked at those different. So I decided that I would answer, I don't know, X number of phone calls a day is what I would do. Another behavior I think about was when we would go visit her, because she was eventually in assisted living, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. There was still food all over the floor. I mean, they would clean once or twice a week, but she still was there was just no cleanliness at all. But I knew that it wasn't sort of a malicious or any type of behavior. That's just what she did. So the boundaries I would do there is either clean it up or just, I had to process it differently. The incontinence, before it really felt like we would go a place and she would just pee on herself, years ago. But this was different. Now I knew that I would just take her to the bathroom. So the boundaries were how, I think the thing I had to say to myself, and I hope people will do this, is here are the situations that are most bothersome to me, and go ahead and have in my mind how I will handle them before they even happen. So I think that's the best that I can do, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that you said, that the boundaries were for you, because really boundaries are for ourselves, because we can't change anybody if they decide that they want to work with us or whatever. But many people don't. They're just on a little path, and they'll either continue to try to break those boundaries on you and change you back to what the relationship was. But those boundaries really are about self. And I think sometimes we don't look at them that way. But it really is about self-care and self-preservation when we're doing that. In my eyes, again, I'm not a medical professional, but that's definitely how I know I've chosen to look at them when I've made the boundaries.
Well,
go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say, especially when you're dealing with someone in your life with a form of dementia, because the things that they're doing oftentimes are not anything you're going to be able to even try to change. And so it is about you and your peace and your own mental health and the way that you talk to yourself and treat yourself. But those decisions need to be made beforehand so that the emotions don't get so escalated when that stuff happens. And I'm not saying I was perfect, because I was not. But at least I had some parameters in mind before I went over to her place.
Yep. And I think that that's important to say too, because none of us are perfect. We're not going to get it right all the time. But if we are conscious about our choices and our reactions and our boundaries, we're less likely, to have situations that we don't want to negatively react to. To handle it in a different way, or if it's even walking away or hanging up the phone, but not engaging, and just saying, nope, this is it for me. On that.
Yeah, I don't have to answer that 10th phone call, and and I was thinking too, one of the other, I guess it would be considered, I don't know if it's necessarily boundaries, but it's something in there, just decisions, the constant questions or the repeating yourself. It was shocking to me sometimes, even if she would be in the hospital, which was a lot, and she would ask the same question over and over again, and they would actually say, "You just asked me that," and I'm thinking, okay, we're in a hospital. You realize that that's going to happen. And so I remember one day when I made the decision, like I was taking her to the doctor, and she must have said 10 times in just a couple of minutes, "The sky is pretty, the sky is pretty, the sky is pretty." And I thought, well, okay, let me just take that as an opportunity to talk about the clouds. So I just decided whenever she said the same thing over and over, I would just take a different element of it and try to guide the conversation. Or if she asked the same question over and over again, I really had to make the mental decision to just answer it, because saying, "You just asked me that," it didn't matter. It just made her feel bad.
Yep.
So anyway.
Yeah. No, that's really true. And I had the same thing with my mom. She didn't have the mental illness, but just that repeating, and it's you don't want to make a game out of it. You've got other things to do, and there were times I wasn't a gracious daughter either, and you feel really bad about that. And then I came to this realization that my top priority in dealing with my mom and loving her was 3 simple things. Was she safe? Was she happy? Was she pain free? Those were my goals every time I talked to her, and that taught me to react differently, because it wasn't about a task that I had to get done or plow through and stuff. And so it really shifted things, and it was like, no, this isn't about her trying to get my goat or push my buttons. She really doesn't remember that she said this, but I think most of us go there going, they're just pushing my buttons. They know what's going to get me. We make it about us, when that's really, really, truly not the case. Now, do you have some tips to help people kind of to keep their cool in the moment when things are getting emotional and a
Mm-hmm.
little tough.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have one really big one that I hope this will help people because, like you said, when you're getting that barrage with those questions, or when you walk in and there's this mess on the floor, or when, she sits right there in the chair and loses her bowels or whatever, how can I keep my mind focused? And so there was one story. So what I always encourage people to do is have a story that you can just have right there in your little brain pocket, and you can grab it whenever you need it. And for me, and it relates to what you just said about your mom, is she happy, pain-free, and what was the other? Safe.
Safe,
right?
happy, and pain-free.
Safe, happy, and pain-free. It's kind of like that. So my mom, shortly after she moved into the assisted living, she started having these nosebleeds, and she would go to the emergency room. She went 2 or 3 times. And the last time she went, they actually admitted her. And she didn't know she was doing it. In fact, she insisted she was not doing it, but she was picking at her nose. Like she must have had a scab, and she was picking at it. You know how the nose just gushes blood.
Yeah.
Well, it was bleeding. Yeah, it was bleeding so bad that they admitted her. And so I got to the hospital, and she was in her room because she had lost a ton of blood. It was the craziest thing. And I got to her room, and she was sitting up, and I sat down beside her. And they had packed her nose. Now, I've never had my nose packed, but from people that I've talked to that have had like sinus surgery or whatever, they like cram gauze as deep as they can up inside their nose. And so I sit down beside her, and she's scared, and I can tell that she's scared. And the nurse walks in, and my mom reaches up to touch because she knows there's something in there and she doesn't understand what's in her nose. And the nurse looks at her and she says, "Miss Judy, I told you not to touch your nose." And my mom leaned over, and I just get emotional every time I tell this story. She leaned over and she put her head on my shoulder, and I kind of rubbed her head, and she was not really crying. My mom always had a manipulative way of crying, but this was different. It was just the quietest little tears, and I could tell that she was so scared, and she had no idea what was going on, and she didn't know why she was being yelled at. And it was like I was above the situation looking down, because I thought, is that what I do to her sometimes? Is that how I make her feel? And in that moment, I realized that I never wanted her to feel that way again, ever, especially at my hand. And so whenever I would be in that situation, and again, like you said, there were times when I was snarky, but I hope from that point forward anyway, more often I was able to grab a hold of that story and just bring myself down and remember I never want her to feel that way again, especially at my hand. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's what I did.
No, and I think it's really important because it's those moments where there's just, I think you see them so vulnerable. I mean, just so exceptionally vulnerable, and you have that connection of, I can do better than that. And it just makes you consciously aware. If you were the one that initiated it, like I did with my mom, when I saw how I reacted, to her, and I just thought, oh, it's so not me, and it's so not fair to her, or if it was the nurse that came in, but being able to see and pick up on, this is really different, this is severe, and we can do better. I think that's very, very important. Now, we've talked about a lot of the bad times with your mom. I would imagine that hopefully you had some good times as well. I know you said you didn't remember as many as probably your sister did. But what were some of the good times that you had that you remember?
Yeah, and there were, and I should have said earlier too, there is a good ending to this story of my mom, by the way, but there were some fun times, and honestly, though, some of those bad behaviors continued. They did. Like I told you, the the filth and the mess, and of course she had people to clean up after her, but a lot of the phone calls and a lot of those things continued. But throughout that, there were some really fun times. Like, she lived right near a Dollar General, and so I would pick her up, I don't know, once a week or so, and we would just drive over to the Dollar General, and she would push that cart through the store and just be like, it's fine, I'm going to shop for a little while, even if it was just for cheese and crackers and whatever it is. I remember we went to Arby's one time, and I think I posted pictures about this on Facebook. We went to Arby's. We were and this was in a small town. We were eating lunch, and it started pouring down rain. And, oh, wait, I'm sorry, it was when we got there. That's what it was. We got out of the car to go in, and the sky just opened up. And like 3 or 4 men came rushing over and grabbed my mom's arm and took her cane, and they just walked her right in there and were so sweet to her. And even though she was drenched like a dog, she felt like a queen. I mean, they just treated her like she was royalty. But the most fun thing, you know, if I can encourage, if you do have someone in your life who lives in assisted living or just any place where they do some fun things, you know, try to be a part of that. Because they had a prom. They had it twice while she lived there. And 2 of my kids were in town, my adult kids, and we went to this prom, and I have video. We danced with her. We ate with her, and it was just the sweetest moment that I will never forget. My kids just, that's what they, instead of all the bad stuff, that's what they remember with her, is that time we went and we danced at the prom. It was the most amazing thing. So look for those big things like that and those little things, because those are the things that you're going to grab onto when this loved one isn't here anymore. Don't you think?
Oh, I definitely think so. I've got some video of my mom. I had a friend come in video, and another gal who was a musician sing with her, and I've got probably, I don't know, 5 or 8 little snippets on my YouTube channel. But when I can have the worst day in the world and I can go watch her in her end stages trying to sing, and then she'd fall asleep, but I can see, you know, the smile, I can hear the giggle, I can see the glint in the eyes, I can see her hands sometimes move, and then poof, she's back to sleep, you know, but it makes my day because I know
watching
she was joyful, and we were able to capture that. So I think sometimes too, you know, we all have our cell phones these days. Capture those moments of joy, you know.
Yes.
Don't forget about them. You know, you take a picture, record a video or just an audio, but you'll be surprised how they can lift you in the future, and just kind of keep that peacefulness. I think, you know, one of the things you had talked about with the boundaries was kind of finding that peaceful spot for yourself to maneuver all of this. And I think sometimes people forget about that it doesn't always have to be chaos, that there are some things that we can do as individuals to create that peacefulness or create that joy on the journey.
And look for, well, and you made me remember something too, just looking for, because when dementia is involved, there are some funny things. I mean, it's not, you know, sometimes there just are. And I remember my mom, I don't know where she got this stuff, but she had a whole drawer full of just miscellaneous. Like one day she came out when I got there to pick her up, and she had on a call light necklace. I don't know where it came from, but it was the, you know, just the red push button call light. But she thought it was a beautiful necklace, and then she had a bracelet that was a hair scrunchie. But she was just like, look what I found, look at my jewelry. And she just thought she had on this gorgeous, expensive jewelry, and it was a call light necklace and a scrunchie. And I was like, oh, you're beautiful. So that was fun when she would do that. Not making fun, but it was fun.
Well, I think, you know, part of the dementia journey is as they progress, and, you know, not everybody, I think everyone thinks everything's end stages, wheelchair, can't talk, and so forth. But people are out there still driving cars, still working. They're at all different stages. But as the progression goes, typically there's this there's this innocence that leads back to childlike behavior. And some people get really upset about, don't treat somebody childlike. Like I would have a saying with my mom, after a while, crocodile, and we would just say that phrase back and forth. And that brought her comfort, that brought her joy. It wasn't childish. That's just the space she was at. And, or, coloring. I remember my daughter when
my
she
mom
was
colored too.
3.
Go ahead, but my mom colored.
Yeah, and my daughter and my mom would color together, and I would come into the room, and I this is literally, I couldn't tell who was prouder of their project, my mom or my 3-year-old. I mean, they just had a ball, and they were very connected. They had a lot of fun, and I think kids can teach us the beauty of innocence, of non-judgment, of just connecting. So tell us about your coloring with your mom.
Well, and there were two things that came to mind. Yes, she had probably 4 or 5 boxes of crayons, but my mom always loved to color. But toward the end, I mean, every time I would come over, she would show me her coloring, and it's interesting that you talk about that childlike innocence, because it did give her peace, and the things that she did that you would think would be children type activities, she loved. And I tell you, one of the great blessings, and if I ever wrote a book about Mom, I would call it Healed Through Dementia, for several reasons. But one of them, she was always afraid to die her whole life. She was afraid of everything. And one of the biggest fears she had was getting cancer. And she smoked for 45 years. She had COPD. When we moved her out of my sister's house, she was wheelchair bound, 24/7 oxygen. She had had a heart attack and heart surgery and type 2 diabetes, all the obesity, lack of self-care related illnesses. She was diagnosed, I guess, about a year, maybe 2 years before she passed, with lung cancer. But the good thing about the dementia was, this is the way, so when you talked about, when people say, well, don't treat somebody like a child, or you need to be honest, or whatever, my mom, I would just say, we would go to the doctor and she would say, do I have cancer? And I would say, yeah, but it's nothing. It's just a little old spot. It's no big deal. And she would say, okay. Every time we would go, do I have cancer? Yeah, but it's no big deal. It's nothing, And she would be, okay. And then she would just want to hug all the doctors.
Yeah.
But if I had been flat up front honest with her, it would have freaked her out.
Yeah.
And there was
and
no need.
so, you were just doing what I call a fiblet. You were making her comfortable, because there's no sense in making them uncomfortable, making them feel unsafe, fearful, because that they sometimes can't pull out of that, because they don't have the logic to be able to do that. I love, when you're talking about the coloring, I think of my mom, how proud she was and how purposeful she felt, and the comfort and the calmness that it gave her. And, I think we have to look at those types of things, not the task, but how are they feeling, and then replicate those things. Do things that will bring that same sense to them of comfort. And for me, again, I did a lot of things wrong for a long time. Little pieces came to me here or there, and I call that kind of the hybrid car e-giver instead of caregiver. And the car stands for the conscious awakening of relationship, and the e-giver is about that emotional giving. They always say it's not what you do, it's how you make somebody feel. And we all know that. We've heard it, but we don't live our lives by it. And I think dementia demands that of us, to become better, to, it's not about big, fancy, and flashy anymore. It's just about real intimacy that almost takes on a spiritual aspect when you really walk the path together with them, when you really say, these things don't matter. This, it's their soul essence, letting me bring comfort to them, and then learning to take, when they're comfortable, when they're happy, when they're joyous, then being able to breathe that in yourself.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. And go ahead.
well, just remembering that this is a season, this will not last forever, and how do you want to look back on this time, you know, what you did, and not that we're perfect, like you said, but when were the times when you really made this person in your life feel loved and safe, and accomplished in some way.
Yeah, and that's what we all want. You know, I think it's seeing the similarities in us instead of the differences, because we have a lot more, we are a lot more alike than we are different. And sometimes when there's a diagnosis, you know, or it could be a cultural difference, we focus on those things instead of how we are all human at our core.
Yes.
And, you know, what is it that we want out of life? And it's really pretty simple. We all want to be accepted and loved and feel purposeful. And a person with dementia, no matter what their stage, can still have that. And, you know, it can get a little bit more complicated with an additional diagnosis like mental illness, but those moments are still there. You know, it can still happen. Well, this has just been such an interesting conversation. I want to talk a little bit, and we've kind of already dove into this a bit, about how compassionate care can affect someone suffering from dementia, but I know you have maybe some other thoughts that we haven't covered on that.
Well, that is actually the really positive part of the story, and it's my favorite thing to talk about. And that's why I do share the really bad stuff, because you're right. When there's the mental illness and dementia, for a long time it just morphed together. I didn't know what was due to what. And there was the anger. And my mom had, on top of the mental illness, the anger and bitterness that she carried around, you know, for years. Well, and actually until she died, she would never even speak my dad's name. Just so angry and bitter. And then so we moved my mom into the apartment for my sisters. But then we made the decision that we needed to move her into an apartment complex. So it wasn't assisted living, but it was a senior high rise, and they contracted with a home health group that just worked there. So those people would manage her medications, clean her apartment once a week, that kind of thing. But it wasn't assisted living. She was so angry. Oh my gosh. And this was as the dementia diagnosis. It's right around that time period. And so that's when we decided to move her in there, because at least she would have someone to help her on a daily basis. She refused to go down to lunch. She refused to go down to dinner. She would not get up off of the sofa to go to the bathroom. When you walked into her apartment, the smell almost knocked you down. She didn't really watch TV. She basically slept. And I'm not blaming the people there. When I say what I'm about to say, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying this is the way it was. The dietary team would just come into her apartment and they wouldn't wake her. They would just set her styrofoam container down on her table and leave. So there was no one there to encourage her. I came over once a week. I would put her in the wheelchair. I would take her to the store, to the doctor, whatever. And this is where sort of the boundaries, I wasn't mean to her. I was respectful, but I was sort of flat. Do you know what I mean? It was like, okay, Mom, I'm here. Let's get up. Let's go. We would go to the store. We would go do whatever. We would come back. And that was her life. The dementia progressed a little bit more. And we knew soon it was time to move her in. So I think it was 2013-ish, we moved her into an assisted living about 30 minutes from my house. Those people that worked in that assisted living, well, a couple things happened. The nurse story of being in the hospital. I started changing the way I interacted with her. My sister did. We tried to exhibit more patience and love and kindness. But the women who worked in this assisted living, they made her go to lunch. They put her in a wheelchair. They brought her down. They made her go to dinner. They made her go to bingo. They made her, if they had an outing to a restaurant, they made her go. About 6 months after she was there. Now, these people loved on her, and they didn't have to. They could have brought her lunch to her. They did not have to make her do anything, but they did. They just took an interest in her. And about 6 months in, no wheelchair, no oxygen, she began laying her clothes out every night for the next day. She began getting out those weird beads that she would find on the floor and the call light bracelets and necklaces or scrunchies. And she became a completely different person for the last 2 years of her life. Wow. It was the most miraculous thing you would have never believed. Now, part of the blessing of the dementia was she began to forget that she hated my father. She began, and that was a blessing. But she became someone who those people in that facility looked to get a hug, to get a compliment, to get a smile, and it all changed. And I attribute a lot of that to the way that these people cared for her. It was a miracle. It just was.
Wow. That's beautiful.
It was.
Yeah, it really is very, very neat to hear that. Now, for families out there listening that are dealing with somebody who maybe has some mental health issues, that are maybe starting to see some changes and wondering if dementia is coming in, or maybe they're not even wondering if it's dementia because they don't even know what that is. You know, a lot of people don't. What are some tips for those family members in terms of who do they go to next to figure that out?
Well, for me, I think the biggest thing, there was a little bit of a gap between the first time our doctor or her doctor mentioned possible dementia and then the time that we actually went to get her tested, because I guess I did not know that there were significant difference between actual dementia versus these mental health behaviors. And so when we finally took the steps, and that's the first thing I would recommend is, you know, ask your doctor, and if your doctor suggests that there might be something going on, they sent us to the neurologist, and there was a very specific test that she took to at least indicate whether her memory was where it needed to be or whether she might be dealing with some early dementia. But it took us a while because of this mental health versus dementia, it was like, you know, she's always dealt with this kind of stuff. I don't think that there's anything more we need to do. So really stay with your doctor. Tell your doctor all of the things. When I was reading the notes early on, it wasn't until it got to a certain point where we really revealed everything that was going on at home. So be honest, you know, just be honest with your doctor. Allow your doctor to give you that advice. And if you don't trust your doctor, find another doctor. But if you trust your doctor, then take those steps, because the earlier the better in getting that in any kind of help. The earlier the better, so that you can have that life with that person.
Yeah, and sometimes you might trust your doctor, but you're still not hearing the answer. It maybe isn't lining up for you. Your intuition is saying something's still off. It's okay to still, even if you have a great relationship with your doctor, to say, I would like a second opinion, you know, or can we look further into that? I think sometimes people don't feel empowered to be able to do that, or that they might offend the doctor. And it's like, this isn't about offending the doctor. This is about getting good quality care and making sure diagnosis is right. And, you know, they can give a referral, and if they really are a good doctor in your court, they shouldn't be offended by that, you know, and will refer you out to an expert in that area to help sort that out. That's my thought, anyways.
I agree, and also, you know, the sooner you do it, the better. We haven't talked about this, and we won't, because I don't. But my father he has Alzheimer's. My father does. We don't have as much of a relationship, and there's no real thing I would want to talk about with him at this point. But there's like there's different types of dementia, and some of them have treatments, and unless you go and see what's going on with that family member, then you won't know how to help.
Exactly. Exactly. And I would
Mhm.
think Lewy body could be a really tough type of dementia to have with a mental illness because that has some hallucinations and some night terrors and things like that. And some of those drugs
Mhm.
might not with one another. Or sometimes people are given a drug for for a mental illness, and it can exacerbate the type of dementia that they have. So even going to your pharmacist and having them, ask for a review of your drugs because the pharmacists, the specialists there actually are better educated than our everyday doctors on interactions, with
Oh
medications
yeah.
and stuff too. So that's
Yeah,
something
that's really
to
good.
keep in mind. Well, Tammy, this has just been a fascinating
Oh,
conversation, and I so appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us. I think it's been extremely helpful, and I just appreciate you being so authentic and
oh,
honest. I know for a lot of families, this is a tough topic to talk about, and you just spoke so authentically and non apologetic because you shouldn't feel ashamed or apologetic over what was happening. It's just your story,
yeah.
And so I think that
Oh,
that's a really neat thing to be able to just talk the truth and
well, thank
to
you.
not be offended by it. But this is your story, and we honor that here on Alzheimer's Speak. So people can get a hold
Thank
of
you.
you, and would you like to give them out your contact information that you'd like them to have?
I would. I would love for you to. My website has basically everything. It's tamiwest.com, and it's TAMIWEST.com. And on there, I have a link to my podcast, which is Consider Yourself Hugged. I have, the speaking information, the book information. I do have some blogs that I've written about mom and dementia. So I would just my email, everything is on there. Please get in touch if there's. Again, I'm not an expert, but I am happy to provide anything that I can that people need. So I'm just so grateful that you allowed me to be on the show.
Yeah. Well,
And I
and
love
you
what
are.
you do.
Oh,
Love what
thank
you
you.
do.
And you are
Mm.
an expert. You're a lived expert, through this.
Yes.
And I think our journeys. I mean, if you talk with people dealing with dementia and probably mental illness too, they feel a lot of times it's the lived experience that is the richest, that gives them ideas to live day to day, with the disease, and also to not feel alone. It's not, you're not just spewing medical information at them, and not that that's not a good thing. We do need it, but sometimes it can overload families too. And it's just nice to hear somebody else's story. So again, reach out to Tami West on her website there, TAMI and then West, WEST.com. She's also on Facebook with Tami West Seminars. And yeah, and listen to her podcast. Consider Yourself Hugged. I love that title. So again, thank you again for spending time with us. I so appreciate you taking this valuable time out of your day to share with us your thoughts and your experiences.
Oh, I am honored. Can't thank you enough. You're amazing. So I appreciate all you do.
Thank you. In wrapping up, I
Okay.
want to also thank our listeners here. And just again, please like, click, and share this. This is information people hear. And keep in mind, you could be our next listener. We'd love to hear your story. Everybody's got a story. So if it's regarding dementia and caregiving, connect with me. You can go to alzheimersspeaks.com. Again, there's a big contact button there. You can email me or you can give me a holler and I will respond as soon as I'm able. And in the meantime, make sure to check out our resources on alzheimersspeaks.com. We have lots of projects and initiatives I think you'll be interested in. And again, we're always trying to raise everyone's voice. So let yours be the next. Have a blessed week, everyone. Bye now.
Hi, everyone. This is Meredith from the Senior Fitness with Meredith podcast, where I discuss all things for seniors. From fitness, your health and wellness journeys, how to be all over strong and beyond. I also have my mini podcast called Motivation with Meredith. It's a great, quick motivational pick-me-up for your days. Join me, listen now, search for Senior Fitness with Meredith on your favorite podcast platform.